part for, okay, I'll say that again. Today's going to be a little bit unusual, but probably the most exciting part of the class in terms of actually putting to words ideas and projects people want to execute on. So I think if folks can turn their cameras on, this will be much more of a discussion that kind of gives me a sense sometimes when I want to call upon people. And when you have an idea and you want to react to other people's ideas, this is also a kind of an interaction that leads to team building in some sense. It's very difficult to build trust with just names, but when you see the human being behind that camera, it suddenly clicks in the sense of thinking about things that you might want to work together with. And my hope really is that it does end up where it's not just, oh, here are folks at Stanford who have teams, there are folks somewhere out there. I think usually we're a fairly small class. It's nice to sort of be thinking about either pairs of two as teams from a dynamic point of view. You can also choose a bigger area that many more people are interested in, but then certain sets of teams take sub portions of that problem or approach the exact same problem with totally different kinds of solutions. I think it's much more about, at this point, one transition that will happen is, as I've said many times, you get what you put in this class in some sense. And so this is going to be the rubber meets the road strategy. So if you have not done so as yet, please open something that's in the chat, the actual Notion link. I'll do that, and I'll walk through a few sets of threads from the past idea boards. The purpose of the exercise that we're about to do today is we're just sharing what we are passionate about. That part is actually incredibly important because not all of us have similar interests. And it's something that it doesn't mean that even the problem that you are thinking about even has a bite-size strategy as yet to work on. You might not have even researched it at a level that you can take a bite out of it. But it's still useful to just put it down in some sense because it'll give us the breadth. And then effectively, it doesn't have to be that you have to work on something that you wrote in there. It's somebody else might have, both a related thread, but it might also be that that's what gets you excited at this very moment. Or it might just be practical because you bring a completely new skill to that problem itself. And so the purpose of the idea board is just that we have populated a space of problems that people might be interested in. And I think for the purposes first, I'm just going to open up whether that's, let's open up the 2022 idea board, for example. And the thing that I want to see is, you can see we all spent some time and very quickly populated. And so for every one of them, we're going to walk through many of them right now and just also share and see comments. So from the left side, you can see there is the miscellaneous category. There is waste stream, frugal biotech, which is really associated with biomolecules not being available. So if you're thinking of insulin as a problem, then that would be in that category. The fact that many Americans and of course people around the world can't afford insulin, a molecule that doesn't cost that much to make. It was invented a long time ago. It's off of patents. Very obviously, a huge change needs to happen in that space. Technology is one of the reasons why it's not accessible. Environmental monitoring, that's much more focused on the notion of unless you can't measure something, you can't fix it. So how do we measure the kinds of degradation in our environmental context that we care about? There is ecological biodiversity, which is not just environmental parameters, but very specifically biological environmental parameters. Of course, global health doesn't need an introduction. Ocean solutions is this thread on frugal oceanography. if oceans are going to be part of the bigger solution, both from a climate perspective, but also if we want to change the trend of not ignoring the oceans, since majority of the habitable or biosphere on the planet is the ocean, that requires us to build a completely new class of tools. Science education, it is something that I know we've done a lot of work in. Lots of people that join in are very passionate about it. You can broaden it out in context of also the challenge, country-specific sets of challenges that are there. Agriculture, food, I would add soil as another example to this. There's a massive innovation right now in the space of what people are doing with agriculture and food. Unfortunately, many of those sets of approaches might not be financially sustainable. Yes, you could make a burger out of cells that are grown in a culture, but what is the actual cost? And does that even solve the climate crisis? Because does that get to a point where majority of the people will transition to that? So I think we have to be critical in thinking about this. Scale is going to be an important criteria that we'll apply when we're writing this. And of course, disease surveillance is the equivalent of thinking about planetary health, where we are not just detecting diseases in humans. I don't know if you guys have been following the avian flu disaster right now. It's absolutely scary. At this point, it is transmitting from mammals to mammals. I think Peru had 500 seals show up on a beach dead, and they all had the avian flu strain. So again, sets of diseases that spread across, but we are too late if we only monitor and image in the context of the human side of the story. So just as a warm-up exercise, we can just, I don't know how many of you have actually spent time on the past idea board. Are there things that suddenly jumped up to people that you've seen as like, oh, this is just such a cool idea or such an important problem? I mean, I can go through sort of randomly in some sense to give you guys a context, but I'm just curious have you guys, is there anything that jumps out to people? And this is, again, open to anybody in the class itself. I'm curious, when I put this thing on the screen, what types of things jump out? So, I think this is much more of a dialogue. And I can walk through some of them. So say, for example, and the purpose of this is to keep the bar quite low on populating something on the idea board, because we're not as yet in the refined stage of, this is just sharing our passion. And it's just about making sure that we're using this exercise to build common interest. So for example, it says right here, can we make a pocket astronomy tool with paper? And that could mean many different things. But what it means to me when I think about it is, astronomy is an incredible way to inspire people. Many a times you think about telescopes and other things. And I remember, there's lots of cell phone apps that have come out that you can point to the sky and you can actually just name stars. And I remember one time just seeing this beautiful paper toy where all phases of the moon for the next, like 2050 were all drawn in this kind of a circular collage that you could assemble, and it would give you, oh, this is going to be the phase of the moon on this date. So that's one example. And one of the threads there is, again, this falls into the context of education, but especially somewhat experiential, rather than, many of you who have seen the animations associated with planetary orbits. It's not trivial. I mean, we trivialize it by making them two-dimensional, but they're not. And so I think the thread here is that it doesn't have to be explicit. It's just pointing to a space that's of interest. What is the lowest cost way of getting astronomy to people? So I think I'm curious for the sets of threads. If people are ready, we could just go to the idea board and start populating. But if people want to talk a little bit about what's already here, that's also fun. Yeah.
Can someone do a project for breath health indicator for newborns?
Can I see?
The lead surveillance second one.
Yeah, I think this was Subhir that populated. So we populate these ideas. Most of the time, the number of people in the class, it's not complete bandwidth to finish or to even initiate a team around it. So I don't remember we picked this up, but we've been building this in the context of the partners that we talk to. So I don't know if Subhir is on the line, but one of the threads around newborns is a majority of the newborns are seen and cared for by community health workers. And the sets of indicators that they collect are very minimal. And there are these things called spirometers. I don't know how many of you have used the spirometer to test how much breath pressure you can make. It's a pretty cool, it's just a flow meter with a fan and you blow in it as hard as you can. And that determines your lung capacity and how your lungs are doing. Very, very simple tool. There is actually a paper spirometer that somebody's also made. So something very quickly that you can put together, but it's also somewhat quantitative in terms of measuring someone's lung capacity. Totally passive as a tool. And one of the threads was thinking a little bit about how do you decipher and see a person in terms of their respiratory health. Lots of early stage diseases like pneumonia have a huge impact on the respiratory side. So I don't know how many of you know the malnutrition band. Do you guys know that? So, I mean, the analogy to that is malnutrition band is probably one of the most impressive frugal life-saving technology. Nutrition band. How do you see a kid and know that they have malnutrition or not? This was a huge challenge for the longest period of time until somebody came up with this is just so simple, but I can't tell you how many lives have been saved with this. Given the age of the child, given their height, there is just a band. You can see a whole bunch of numbers. You put that around, and if it meets that set of given criteria, then they are quantitatively in that zone of malnutrition or not. And literally anybody can use it. This is nothing, it's just a piece of paper. But it was very difficult before because sometimes people didn't have the kind of looking for other symptoms is much harder. And so you can see, it's a very impactful tool. And so when I'm saying, how do you broaden tools like that from the pulmonary health perspective? So it's a pretty, it's a very well-defined problem. It's definitely up for grabs. And I think you will see sometimes you can tag a post to be multiple categories itself. So yeah, let's just spend a little more time on anything that jumps out to people. I want this to be much more driven by your passions. And then we can start and talk about projects that you guys might be thinking about. I can tell you this, we are currently working on this. This is a huge issue. We had Madhu visit the lab 2 years ago, and he's coming again soon, actually. I'll send out his talk invite to all of you. And he is a TB expert. And of course, TB is a huge disease of poverty, also connected with a lot of poor air quality, and it's an infectious disease. It spreads everywhere. And the classic way you detect TB is through a chest X-ray. That's the best way to immediately tell. It's a screening tool, but just a simple thing like a chest X-ray isn't accessible. Most people cannot actually afford a single chest X-ray. Most primary care hospitals don't have a chest X-ray. There's all kinds of safety things when you don't have power. And so I think Kian, who's a new student who's just joined at the medical school and in our lab now, we are now starting to seriously think about an ultra low cost chest X-ray system. And the current example for these, there are certain class of systems that are coming online, mobile chest X-ray. They are starting to get better, but not cheaper. And so one of the maybe portable, many of these units still cost $100,000 in some sense. So that's kind of funny. They really took it to the road. I think so. This is the wrong way of doing this. All they did is took the same design and say, "Hey, let's take that out." And that's not what I mean. And I mean portable. I'm gonna show you what I actually mean. It really is funny. It's a very marketing oriented picture. You can see that this is not gonna survive.
Middle of the desert.
Handheld. This is what I.
Remember the movie with Will Smith?
Uh,
He was selling me some devices.
Yeah, so this is the kind of a device that we are thinking about. These are portable X-ray machines. You can see that the source can become quite small. You stand next to it, and Kian is actually right now in Kenya collecting some field surveillance data from the needs and other sets of requirements. So anyway, I think it's just we've been thinking about this on X-ray source and electron sources for a while, but we finally found the capacity to finally actually execute. So you can see, you know, these sets of things can cost roughly around $50,000, but this is what is needed for portable X-ray screening. So you can arrive in a place and really screen 100, 200 people in a single day, and then only refer to the ones. Because TB is a long-term disease, it doesn't show up and people don't realize that it's this chronic thing that grows over time. And the more you delay treatment, the worse it actually gets. And so you can see there's a whole bunch of data associated, and I'd mentioned Madhu. And so I think there's a lot hidden in every one of these sets of things. So maybe what I'll do is let's pick a few sets of categories. It's if any of you want to just choose a category, it's like we could play Jeopardy for a few minutes. I don't know. This is like, I've never played Jeopardy. I don't know the rules, but whatever, 10 points for global health. Who wants to pick? Or you guys pick a category and then just somebody pick a card and we'll talk about it. I think I just want to give you a flavor of just transitioning from a problem into thinking about a solution space. To give you
Can we talk about
Yeah.
alternative to concrete? I was looking
yeah, go
through
ahead.
and it
Can you
seemed
tell me
interesting.
which card it is? It's
Yeah, it's in the environmental monitoring one.
yes.
It's a little down, further down.
Further down.
In environmental monitoring.
Oh, what did I end up doing? I don't see. Do you see that on my screen? I see. Maybe we could just talk about that directly.
I was in the 2020 board.
I
Sorry.
see. Oh, you're on
Uh,
another board. Yeah, so there is another board. There is the 22 board. There is the 2020 board. You can just talk about it. Do you want to briefly talk about it? I mean, I guess one thing that I can mention is Smriti is talking about the fact that concrete is a huge, almost from a carbon footprint perspective, a terrible material. And if you looked at the numbers for the biomass versus human-made stuff, remember that concrete plays a huge role in what we have been building. And so there has been an incredible amount of focus in terms of thinking about alternative, what are cement-like materials And I know, for example, one company that just started out of Colorado, it's a very clever idea. They just take sand and cyanobacteria and they mix them together. So I'll show you guys the solution if I'm going to remember. And I think the reason on these sets of problems, I often like to just think about what is the current state of the art. It just gives you a sense. It doesn't mean that the problem is solved, but it gives you just one example of, there is actually a creative insight in that space. And when there are other creative insight, it's not a reason to step back. It's actually the reason to push in, because then you know that the problem is real. So, when you see activity in a given space, it should actually get you excited. So, well, I see. I'll just pop that in the Colorado University cyanobacteria concrete alternative. Building materials come alive with help of bacteria. So this is that material. You can see it looks and feels like sand grains and other sets of things. But what it is essentially, I'll pop this paper out, Rice Krispie treats. And so then they're doing lots of sets of testing. But what it is essentially many of these cyanobacteria generate the kinds of glues that can mineralize certain structures. And of course, the claim here is that if it's regenerative, because the bacteria itself remain alive for a certain time. And so you can think about, so you can see the cross-linking and the process is essentially from a living material itself. And, this has now grown into an entity. Let me see, Jeffrey. There's a photograph Jeffrey had shared with me recently. So, I think this is one of the frameworks. And again, this is one of many places and things that you can think about. The sets of experiments, the sets of things that you need to do to start, it's actually pretty straightforward. So, we have you can think about it. If you wanted to do a Fred Park on something like this, well, how would you do it? What does it actually mean to actually manufacture something like this instead of manufacturing bricklins? I don't know if you guys know what bricklins are. So let me just show you. Do you guys know how bricks are made? So this is a valuable bricklin in India. Because sometimes you might be picking up, it's one of the largest manufacturing across the world, and still a tremendous amount of child labor is still used in bricklins, unfortunately. And so this is what working conditions inside a bricklin can look like. And you can see this is essentially clay being roasted just like it was thousands of years ago. It's a huge health hazard, kids work, the kind of labor that goes in, but this provides livelihood to a significant portion of people on our planet. And you can say, oh, what does the modern version of a bricklin somewhere in the middle of nowhere look like? Because, we can have an interesting set of a technology unless it's implemented in the context that's local. It's never going to make it. It's not worth just thinking about, oh, a few sets of Stanford buildings will be zero carbon neutral because they were using this fancy new brick as a technology. That means nothing from a global scale. So I think when you're thinking about a problem, give it a context, give it a scenario to say, oh, this is where I want to implement it. And I think that country context is going to become very important, or the social context will become. So what does the mass manufacturing of something like this at low cost look like? What does the open capacity for teaching a new era of brick making might look like for living materials, for example? So, you have enough data to show that, yes, that idea works, but it's still a huge problem in terms of, the kind of health hazards. And that's why the sets of problems become much more complex rather than just thinking about the technical part. And so I think in your way that you're approaching your Fred Parks and the types of problems, you have to inject the social context. Yeah, so Smriti, that's a fantastic example. Anybody else wants to choose something and talk about something from this board? And then we will soon, maybe in 10, 15 minutes, just transition to starting to create our own. But I'm just curious, amongst many of these, there must be certain sets of things that deeply resonate with a few of you. Go ahead, Alankit.
Can we talk about the one in
Yeah,
science?
and also, can you introduce yourself? I'm trying to
Sure.
remember people's names, and yeah, it's useful from team building as well.
I'm Alankit. I'm based out of Austin. I'm doing my PhD at UT Austin, and I'm a biomedical engineering student. And I'm interested in the science education part of this class, and
Yeah.
also other fields that we talk about. But what resonated with me is one of the ideas up there, which is how do we deliver immersive science education? And I think I am an optical engineer and I'm really interested in AR, VR devices. So I've been thinking about how science experiments from an Indian context can be, how can we create more immersive practical experience for kids? And I've been thinking about some ideas. So if we can talk about this, it'll be great.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And I think next week is gonna be all about frugal optics. So that would be a fun thread. I think I've delayed it a little bit because I realized we were slow on team building. I mean, the obvious one in terms of thinking about something that has actually delivered a quite of value in immersive science education is actually the Google Cardboard. So I'm assuming everybody knows what a Google Cardboard is. No? That's correct. Yeah, not the glasses. That would be the super expensive solution too. And it's kind of fun because Google is large enough. And, I mean, literally a cell phone and two cheap lenses. How many of you have actually used the Google Cardboard? So, I think it's valuable. I'll bring one in to show, and Alankit, you should play with it as well. There's so much potential in what you can do with some very, very simple tools. And of course, Google is focused on an educational kind of a context associated with it. It's valuable to learn where they are currently in something like that. I think what sometimes has been missing when I look at this solution, it just doesn't have the level of content creators that you would want to see, because this is not making money for anybody. There were used to be ads. So New York Times would have Google Cardboard ads as a way to get, but revenue is not what you drive. But there are lots of creators now, and especially now with the new era of AI tools generating content, you can imagine that the cost of making interactive media is going to go rapidly low. And the big thing piece here is in terms of content that's not just, I think there has been a lot of place-based content that's been generated in the sense that you get transformed to where you were. But if you wanted to teach biology with a tool like this, you can imagine that you have to transform, and there's a lot of content generation that might be the missing link right now for its adoption.
On that note, there's a startup which I think it's based out of Stanford. There was a student from Stanford. He started this thing called InSpirit, and it's a VR-based content creating company, and they have collaborated with Meta Quest to take their AR VR sets. And InSpirit it's without a space between InSpirit. I think it's the second one right there. Yeah, this one. Yeah. So, I mean, reimagining, they have all these content for AR, VR. So this is the software side of it.
Yeah.
But I feel the hardware side is the bigger challenge as well. Right?
Yeah. And I think, one of the threads around this is, you can also think about how do you build a model in this context that's much more akin to Khan Academy's approach, where all content is free. I mean, from an educational perspective, that's a much harder thing, because yes, you could create this content. The moment you lock it, it's not going to inspire the broadest group of people, and you're still, so I don't know what the model around access actually look like, and what does it mean for content generation to be balanced in the sense that it starts to be as open as possible. I think, yeah, this is a fantastic example. It would be really fun. We have one student who's worked in the lab and has now spun off a AR/VR company. And that's really much more on the technical side of the optics to do extreme performance in these systems and so there are people that we can engage, but what would be valuable, Alankrit, if you're thinking in terms of the optics side of the story, what is the next step between Google Cardboard and all these fancy things? So I would much rather start with what we do with the Google Cardboard and then go step further. That makes, there's lots of annoying things. You get busy after some time. One fun thing that I have to say I enjoyed that I'm really excited about testing. I want to see the natural world rather than be in a metaverse, unfortunately. But there is one time I felt that, oh my goodness, this is something I want to try, which is there is a waterproof AR/VR set. You can go to a swimming pool and load up, say, Indonesia reef, and you're literally snorkeling in your swimming pool and a whale comes by. And I would be up for that. And I think one of the threads was for people who can't dive, and just also, there's lots of reasons that you can't. It was quite a remarkable thread. Just all they did was a very simple thing that they made the set waterproof. And it's just, again, another way of inciting and getting that sense that, oh, once that barrier is removed, then eventually the person would actually care about life underwater, because most people that are landlocked just never see the ocean life as it would be. So there's a huge amount of space.
That's me. I never see the ocean from I would love to join this, because I just wanted to say, I'm super curious about looking at images from the ocean. It's not really a problem, but I would love to do a project with that. And maybe in this idea, I could join it from a software side, for example.
Yeah, I'll
if you can
something that I've been thinking about, which is, it doesn't have to be a AR/VR implementation. But the thing that I want to do is be able to go to the deep ocean. I find it really, and I'm an oceanographer in some sense, and even I don't have access to be able to go to 1,000 meters. There are very few humans on this planet that have gone, but creating that sense, we have planetariums. You walk into a planetarium and you get that immersive experience. That type of an experience for the deep ocean, that's another version of thinking about it, to really push the limits of what has been done in that space, because that has not been done. There's a sense of fear, there's lots of risks associated, but there is also a lot of data. Many ROVs that go deep ocean have live stream data that's coming out, but you watch them in tiny screens, you don't feel like you're actually in the water in any way and form. So anyway, it's just kind of a thread on that side. I see Marwan's hand is up, so go ahead, Marwan. Oh, I think you have to unmute yourself, Marwan. Yes, and then could you briefly reintroduce yourself, just one-liner?
Yeah, hello, I am Marwan from Sudan. I am from Sudanese Knowledge Society, aim to realize knowledge society in Sudan. I pick from Frugal Science, I think 2020. There is a question about how to make, how can we design basic science experiment for kids in a different way than textbook in Frugal way. I am passionate in how to enhance and improve the access of science to our kids and our students. And I think this it is inspiring me more. Yeah, and even in Sudanese Knowledge Society for the couple of 3 years, we come across the concept of citizen science, and this also frugal science. It is one aspect of citizen science, but we, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of comments associated with this, and I think one of the threads on this front is that's been the anchor point of full scope to begin with, which is, I mean, I think at some point of time, once you all get, this Friday, we will actually, which is tomorrow, right? Yeah, make sure you guys have your full scopes working, because tomorrow would be the day we would go sampling. And so now I'm assuming you've all practiced a little bit. Is that true? Have you guys even opened your full scopes? Yes? Yeah. Oh, you don't have it? Okay, yeah, we have plenty, so we'll build them. But tomorrow we'll really focus on that immersive side of that. And I think kind of one thread that I want to mention, Marwan, is as we are sending units to all of you in some sense, the thread really around when we start thinking about this context. So this is a photograph, for example, from Congo.
Yes.
This is one of the communities. And again, now that picture is from the Lebanese border in a refugee camp in Syria.
That is very
and
good.
Often enough, one of the things that we think about, this is actually a island across in the Pacific. And one of the things that we often think about is when you're thinking about a tool and textbooks and content, we did an experiment globally early on, where rather than building content, we just built and focused on the tools and focused on sharing the tool, because, you know, rather than kids just being absorption, they are absorbing knowledge. They can also be creators of knowledge. And so it flips this idea of a textbook around, that the nature is our textbook. And so there is nothing that comes with a full scope that tells you this is, but then once you've started learning, that's when you engage in the community, when you can start doing this activity in a structured manner. And then the division in this space, it's called formal education and informal education. There's a lot that we learn sitting in a classroom where many of you have sat in lectures, but then the other part of this is how much you actually do what will inspire. So I think in that space of science education, you have to make a choice early on whether you're thinking about this in context of formal versus informal settings itself, because it totally changes how you would build something to begin with, and how you would share that experience, or what the focal point might actually be. You know, all of those. So when I think about Khan Academy and other things in my mind, they're somewhat in the middle, but much more inclined towards the formal side. When I think of full scope, we've designed it really to be in that informal context, because we feel that there is a big gap there, and then people build the bridge from the informal to the formal. And I think often enough, at least, you know, running workshops across the world, the most common thread is just that sense of surprise, and it breaks down the barrier between the teacher and the student. You know, you all have tremendous knowledge. You bring all kinds of things to the table, and I should be ready and humble and ready to learn, and just like all of us are in this room. And when we do these sets of workshops, it's often the kids figure out it first, and then the teachers ask them, oh, can you show me how to use it too? And that's the first time that reversal of roles has actually happened. And that's very empowering. And it just feels, you know, we're all learners at all times. And it sort of opens the eye for many of the educators that have been practicing education per se, but have been worried a little bit about, you know, what will somebody say if I don't know something? And that's a huge issue. So I think in some sense, when you're designing something like that, keep in mind that context. And I would be very curious, Marwan, from the Sudan perspective, if you talk this week or this weekend to some of your friends that primarily teach in a certain age group and have them share what are their biggest challenges, what happens in that classroom on a daily basis. And I think they're very common, but it's useful to also have that dialogue. And I think, one of the threads would be is once a couple of these shipments arrive to you, it would be very valuable for you to be thinking about who is in the classroom every day that you can bounce ideas with. Because I think this is something that we will do when we will choose projects, then I'll assign mentors in those fields because we have a huge network and it'll depend on projects. Any other, maybe we'll just pick one more and then I want to transition to populating the ideas that you have all been thinking about. Or why don't we transition, because we don't have that much time and I know you've all been thinking about this. So at this point, we could do this live, we could walk through. I know, lots of you have actually been working on projects, so it's actually valuable to just briefly share that on the board. We could do live editing. So if people feel shy talking about it in class, you can first write a one-liner. And so I can go in here, or we can do this in a scenario where people can share what they're thinking about, and we will use that as a means to construct the idea boards. And so I think, one of the threads, it's perfectly okay if it has overlap with the past boards. It's just, so anybody wants to venture out, we can talk, we can write first for a few minutes and then discuss them one at a time. I mean, everybody has to be involved in a project. So I see Varun's hand. Go ahead, Varun.
Hey, Manu. Yeah, sorry I couldn't make it to class in person today, but Sumer and I were talking, and I think we've talked to you about this idea of using smartphones as an alternative to the Raspberry Pi or Arduino, because right now you can acquire like a used smartphone with a nice display and very capable processor and a nice camera for like $30 or so. So about the same price as a Raspberry Pi, but you get a display and a camera with it, more processing power. And then also, oh, sorry, it's a Sumer, not Samir.
U
MER.
SUMER.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Yes.
Also, I think like it's something that's wasted quite a bit. People will upgrade their phones and then they'll get thrown away. So in some sense, it feels like if we could use this smartphone instead for all sorts of devices, it'd be really useful way of reusing something that's thrown away, and also something that's very capable.
And the way that I would do this is now, once you create a category, you go in and you start writing all kinds of content. And the other thing that I would do is on the board category. Do you know, Ian, how to add board? Oh, here it is. So you can click. I would also put this in the waste stream modification category as well. And the reason, Varun, I'd already mentioned it to you, but I'll mention it here. The reason I really like this idea is, in general, if you look at the breadth of electronic waste, it's incredible. I mean, it is just amazing because the engine that's driving it is marketing. And so whenever marketing drives something, you always feel that your phone is not good enough. And that's been driving this. I mean, we all know we've been succumbed to that many times ourselves. And in the same scenario, the number of engineering hours that go in and building this incredible product has been remarkable. The bottleneck, and I think we face this every day when we are making this choice in the lab itself, is that there are very little open source tools and we have to kind of hijack controls inside. So I just want to turn off, for example, the autofocus of a camera. And I've had actually several conversations, even with folks at Google and other things, that they are actually excited about for some of the phones creating and giving the access to API for specific projects. But in general, it's valuable to be thinking about the general purpose sets of tools, and maybe Android would be one place to start. But opening up a capacity, a software to be able to truly have access to all the hardware that's in there becomes, and so, this can be almost a meta project. Rather than creating the final end product, all you're focused on is making hardware optimally operate for all kinds of projects. Like one example is we've been trying to figure out, and I think there are a couple solutions of this, to get data in and out of phones using the audio jack, to be able to use the audio jack as a way to control your phone, because you might build a device that just fits into the audio jack. And so think of these as little modules. And what I really love is that then hundreds of thousands of projects could actually use that. And I think the analogy to screens is really fantastic, because the amount of integration, I mean, the fact that many current cell phones are waterproof gets me very excited, because then, like, for example, we're working right now to make plankton scopes waterproof. And it's a lot of work. It's not trivial to build something that's truly waterproof. So one analogy would be, is if you could give me motor control very easily, Varun, we can put together a planktoscope where all electronics is fully waterproof. So anyway, fantastic idea. I think anybody who wants to engage, the rule is that you should be in one team that's going to be your driver team for this quarter, but you can actually engage, share your expertise, and join other teams peripherally if you don't feel completely stretched out. So, but I think in the end, you want to commit to one team just for the purpose of this quarter, but you might have experience in hacking cell phones, and you say, hey, I can just show you what I've done in the past. And then you can build on top. So you can become a peripheral team member for any of the teams itself. Okay, I'm already seeing. So why don't people start writing? And then I'm just going to call. So I see Smriti already has one. Take it away, Smriti. What did you write?
I put how should we measure microbial biodiversity and help people keep track of their microbial, it should be microbial ecosystem and what affects it. So I think that one of the, things that was spoken about in most of these meetings about the environment and everything is that the biodiversity is getting affected because of factories, etc. And there's a lot of waste from factories that people are not keeping track of, especially in India. And I used to go to work in factory areas, so I would see like the effluent waste is never fully cleaned, and that must be affecting the environment, especially the microbial environment, and especially might be causing like resistant bacteria or stuff like that. So how do we kind of get citizen scientists to monitor that, or companies themselves to take the prerogative to monitor that and report that to the government? And what is the tool that we should be giving them that is completely like simple, that you can just hand to the lowest factory worker and he'll be able to collect and test, kind of like the Foldscope, but for...
So a couple of comments. I think one thread to do is to always narrow when you write down something, try narrowing the goals initially so that it becomes very concrete. So one microbial, we could say bacteria, for example. So bacterial diversity can be one, and then it'll also allow you to be thinking about tools, because if something can be measured using microscopy or whether it requires other sets of tools. So that's one panel of thinking about it. And then the other context of this is also narrow a little bit which specific environment as an early phase. One of the things that does happen in a waste context is what happens in our soils. There is certain sets of tools that we've been thinking about in the aquatic context, but the soil is a very unique context. It's a very important one because much of the microbial content in soil has a huge implication in what you can and cannot even grow. So I think whenever people are posting and writing, think a little bit about a narrower and narrower context initially, because the idea is if you can solve a problem for one, you can always expand the scope, but it is harder to narrow down and write your Fred Parks if it is about all microbes, because microbes are also in the air, microbes are also in our gut, they're also in the sewage system, and it might be that the tools and technologies that we might want to explore would be completely different. And I think the other part that is very valuable in this context is if citizens are at the heart of this, rather than the classic approach that we take. I mean, I can give you an example even in the context of COVID, much of the surveillance that was done was completely biased, because often enough, the places where you can do this type of centralized surveillance with either research institutes are in just a handful of cities. And so Boston and San Francisco have a fantastic sewage monitoring system because academics put that together, and then you could go to a random town. And so this is also where you can think a little bit that, oh, I am forcing that this tool will actually be used by an average citizen. And I mean, that sets a big challenge, but a very exciting one.
Yeah, I think Kimberly has like defined it better in the environmental monitoring part, like what I was
And I
thinking
think
about.
the idea here is also eventually these boards would merge. And I'm using this as a way for you all to find each other. There are, you're all long lost souls that have never worked together. And when you share and come together in the context of ideas, then it becomes very exciting. Okay, so since you mentioned, I'll ask Kimberly, maybe, do you want to just say a word? Yeah.
So my kind of build off of that was how can we make eDNA monitoring technologies more accessible as a citizen science tool? Because like in the field of ecology, like and measuring environmental DNA has been rising a lot, but a lot of those tools are like super expensive and like only use it in your lab.
Yeah. So a quick comment on that front is one tool that we've been developing in the lab that I have been wanting to transition now to ecological monitoring is, I haven't talked about it, SnapDX, which is our kind of a LAMP-based system for doing disease diagnostic monitoring. And then the first thing that we've picked up, and literally, if people are excited, we have some shark DNA, and we've been using that as a first test case to say, okay, this has been demonstrated in the past that if you take a water sample, could you say that there was a shark here a couple hours ago? And that's just one example. There's a lot of illegal trades that happen in which you really need to do, and I'm just not saying purely from a shark's perspective itself, but even it's useful to choose an example and an idea. And so that's one approach to it. But one of the threads to think a little bit about in narrowing it is to immediately be thinking about a specific problem. So again, you see what I'm doing is I'm always taking a big picture idea and narrowing it to a very specific application, because then I see I can write a Fred Park. With sharks, I know what the previous eDNA measurement looked like. So your sensitivity specificity has to work in that space. And then I also know based on that what that cost would be. And then you say, oh, no, this technology doesn't work because sharks don't release that much DNA. And I think one of the other parts of that scenario is, aquatic versus other samples completely change. Most of the time when you go eat sushi, by the way, it's not the fish you ordered. Nobody knows what you're eating because there is no, and so that's been proven using molecular testing that when you order sushi, lots of times there's all kinds of other stuff. And so, you could say, hey, I'm just using that as a narrow case of just X number of fish. There is a lot of requirements possibly when people are faced with making a decision when they catch illegal trade happening of biological materials. Could you actually detect and test using eDNA whether pangolins were being transferred in that package? So I think narrow it as much as you can for a problem of a very specific problem, and then we can discuss and plan. I mean, this would be really fun. There's a lot that's already been built on this, all on human disease side. And I think, sharks is what we've been thinking about, but we can think about a couple other scenarios. And I think I'm going to do a lab session on LAMP associated technologies itself. So, you would at least have a starting point. Yeah, I really love that. And I think it is also a challenge from a sampling point of view. So what's been missing in the eDNA approach, if you go to a lake, how much water should I collect? How should I process it for it to be viable to say that I will catch what I was thinking about? It's not so trivial like, oh, I collected a vial. Is that enough? How do you actually even know the baseline for these types of questions? So even that hasn't really been worked out. Often enough, sequencing and a couple other sets of threads can be used in augmentation to first figure out what sensitivity specificity you might need. Okay, let's keep going. I really like this starting to fill up. Anybody here who's written something that want to talk about their board?
I wanted to ask you a question before I.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you think about something, because again, I don't come to this with any health experience.
Yeah.
But I thought about, places where there can be applications of technology or in especially in developing economies.
Yeah.
So something, for instance, that I thought about was using smartphones and their flashlights in detecting glaucoma. But then that's something that I've seen online that people are already working on.
Yeah.
People have already done research on.
Yeah.
So how unique do ideas need
Yeah.
to be?
Yeah. No, I think it depends on how far you are coming from in this space. It's perfectly okay to be thinking about the same problem. Sometimes it's also, as an exercise, perfectly okay to also be thinking about the same solution. Because remember, this is a warm-up exercise for you to be the frugalist in the future. And it just depends. Sometimes it is actually valuable to be in a crowded space because you would learn a lot very immediately. And that's why I'm kind of suggesting sets of things and technologies and threads that people have done to build upon. You might find an issue in that approach. Like, for example, I can tell you with COVID, with oxygen saturation monitors and pulse oxes, it's a pretty simple technology. It's been established for, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years. A huge challenge came about that some of the even approved devices did not work on black skin. And it was to an extent that people knew it, but these things are approved, so they were still being marketed, and it somehow slipped in that entire framework that nobody tested it for darker tones in a rigorous manner. And at this point now, FDA has released this kind of a thing for retesting almost all of them. But so you can see, it's like an obvious place. You thought that everything was working, the solution is there, you change the context, and because they got used more broadly, and the same issue showed up in India, same issue showed up in many African countries, same issue showed up here, but it was just not voiced enough in a manner. So don't worry about crowded space. What you have to worry about is that you have to be passionate about the problem, not the idea, not the solution, but the problem. And so we're kind of wearing a slightly different hat. While solutions and ideas are dime a dozen, we can come up with 10 other ways of doing it. It's the problem that it has to link where you feel like, yeah, no, I'm excited about actually spending time in this quarter, really digging in. Like, it can't be a casual affair. Like, choose something that you're passionate about. Everybody's time is precious. And so I think that's the criteria that I wouldn't worry too much about a crowded space or not. If it was a solved problem, you wouldn't be thinking about it. And then it's a solved problem in what context? Like, which place? We know all these solutions exist, but they're not accessible in the context that you're thinking about. And you might arrive at a completely different, after doing many Fred Parks, that the problem is people don't trust medical system. That's what it's boiling down to. Who knows? I think this is a rabbit hole you need to enter. So these idea boards will change. It's almost to an extent. Oh, what just happened? Oh no. Oh, somebody changed. Okay, yeah. Sorry. But how come everything is in no tags? Are we? Which board am I on? I'm sorry. What is going on?
All the time.
Okay. Hold on. Don't wait a second. What just happened? Yeah, why don't we undo? I won't touch anything. Yeah, just when people are writing, be cautious to not click buttons. Oh, do we want to take just a snapshot if people know what they wrote? Hold on, let's just take a few snapshots here. Does anybody know how to do that as a?
Shift 3, control, okay.
Okay. I will post this on Discord also, just so let's do idea board. You all can keep writing the threads in your notepads on your local computers. I am already seeing, I don't know who wrote thread on the earthquakes. Can you start talking about that? Because yeah, while driving down today, this was something that I was going to talk about, even in the context of just what's literally unfolding right now. So I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's like the earthquake detection thing where I saw like a few years ago someone did a project on like using a mouse to detect like low class like the low class seismograph. But here like I was thinking also like for like rescuing people from earthquakes, there's a lot of effort done like detecting like heat, like just like thermal detection or like using a small microphone to like see if there's any sound. Maybe like a low cost like analysis of like how to like rescue and like these kind of like really tumultuous situations.
Yeah, so I think the way that I would write the problem statement is don't choose the technology as yet. That would go in the design parameters like thermal, optical, acoustic, and then you would evaluate and analyze to say, oh, in a real setting when rescuers are all around talking and it's absolute chaos, does acoustics even make sense, right? And so then you can kind of narrow down. And I mean, one thread that I'm excited about on the drive coming in, I was thinking about this very specific problem is actually there's a very recent class of papers that have come out that you can use Wi-Fi signals to reconstruct human bodies in its entirety, purely using Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi travels across walls. And so I'll show you guys this paper, and I got very excited about this today morning. So Wi-Fi signal seeing through walls. And so, and this is literally just a couple days ago, and I was reading this paper. Let me just show you guys this paper. Talk about privacy. You can know exactly what your neighbor is doing. But I mean, that's the era we live in. If you want their Wi-Fi signal. So what's amazing, it's been for a while, people have demonstrated that there is a signal in a reflected kind of a context, that just purely from the power. But what is so incredible about this is that they were able to actually construct the body pose itself. So there's so much signal in that from a few hotspots. And so I think, I mean, this would be kind of a fun thread. And one place I would say is, okay, start with this. I mean, so all of these sets of people, it's generated purely through just a Wi-Fi antenna and a receiver. That's it. And of course, we know that, huh? Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, I'm getting a Wi-Fi signal here. It doesn't mean that the thing is here. It could be in the room. That's the beauty of many Wi-Fi signals. I mean, this would be phenomenal place to start. This literally happened, and we have the context of what's going on, and it just sort of starts. And again, this is all open source implementation. The first place to start would be is to just literally replicate. When we get to a point when we understand the problem, the dynamic range that's needed, the distances that's needed, and actually, you know, also reviewing if there are other. And again, you know, the challenge around this is there might be certain entities and things, because security space is a big one. And, you know, there's all kinds of technologies probably that are being used in secure, but they're all closed. When you think about what's happening in Syria right now, literally, it's something that anybody should be able to put together now with all the parts that are accessible, like Wi-Fi routers are accessible everywhere. It's like, how do you, in the context of disaster, when disaster strikes, make this accessible and available? I mean, we ship routers all the time, so the distribution is not an issue. Some special person shouldn't have to arise. And if there is a signal that can be, then you can act upon it. I mean, it would be really, really fun. So this is what I've been thinking about. I was going to mention it in the class. And then again, it might be that somebody who is interested in signals and stuff might engage in the class itself. And again, I think I mean, you know this already, all of you, that I can't state the urgency of something like that. Because, and again, with many of these types of things, every hour matters. So if you can detect somebody very quickly, then even before the rescue teams arrive, the detection teams who are not people who are not, I mean, it's very dangerous situation because you don't want to actually cause more harm. People are worried about more rubble falling down. So the time of the rescue team arrivals is much later. There's a lot of work that's been done in this space on robotics of snakes, crawlers and stuff. And I've never really seen anything that has actually worked. So I'm kind of, yes, cameras and others. And again, this is just one of many ideas that should be listed and analyzed to really see, how much wall of concrete can a Wi-Fi signal go through? But then again, you all know these Wi-Fi boosters. I use them in my house. So there is a solution to that. And you say, okay, how much dense volume could you go through? This would be phenomenal. And I think, one of the threads here is you can actually see even the poses of these are all, I have to read through this carefully. But anyway, I'm super excited about this kind of type of content. Say that again?
Share the link to this.
Yeah, I'll post this, in the idea board. And I think the idea would be the way we operate on this is we go here. And so earthquake degrees, I'll just kind of mention that using Wi-Fi detection for body pose. Let's test if this is good enough signal work in context of the disaster. And so you can go on any idea board now and post an idea for that idea. Like, I could see this way to do it. And this is kind of why we do this as a community, is because it doesn't even mean that you have to be the one to engage. It's just, you're just sharing ideas. You could say, I just found data for you. So think of these idea boards as kind of our shared a pot that you could be thinking about, and you say, I know exactly how to quantify this problem. Look, this has been a number. And I think, this is also very important that when we are making these, this weekend's exercise is I would want you all to write your name, first populate the boards, and the cost of taking this class is your name should be at least on 1 or 2 idea boards as, hey, I'm excited about something like this. And, it's not allowed that you're not excited about anything on the board. That's not allowed, because that's the whole point to taking the class. If you're not excited about what's on there, create a board, recruit people. It's okay early on to write your names on multiple boards. And what we will do is we will do one-on-one sessions. I'll sit down with every team and we'll just kind of brainstorm the hell out of each of the individual problems itself. But it's very valuable to start sharing your interests. So I'll keep going on more of these. I love this. I want, you want to talk about it, Kimberly? Yes. No, it's a beautiful sampling technique. And I think it's perfectly okay in the idea board. This is a flipped board in some sense because it's effectively a sampling technology that's now looking for a problem.
Yes, exactly.
Which is fantastic. So I think it's perfectly okay. Like I could have also made a board around, what could you in the miscellaneous session, what could you do with these Wi-Fi reconstructions? And then somebody would say, I know what to do with it. So it's perfectly okay. But yeah, you can talk a little bit about it. This is very creative.
thinking it's something that we're all doing, walking around, and like the amount of ground that we cover. There's probably a lot of things on our shoes.
Yeah.
So it could have health applications, it could have environment things.
Yeah.
Not quite sure about
Yeah.
the problem yet.
Yeah, so the one problem that we have looked in this context is from a full scope perspective itself. There's a common workshops that we run where everybody takes their shoe and then we just take a sticky tape, mount on the bottom of it and start looking at everything that you're just carrying around. From a microbiome perspective, it's a really fun one. But then from a hospitals and other perspective, it starts to get serious. Now, if you are just swabbing people's shoes, that's the best way to look at nooks and crannies in a hospital, which you couldn't otherwise do. And most people, when they are coming in or going out of the hospital at the end of the day, could just walk through a place where a swab is quickly made, and that becomes a real-time monitoring system. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is very related to the eDNA. So I would actually combine that. One thread there could also be either in a context of a rainforest. There are lots of elusive animals that you look for, but you have no idea whether you'd find something. Yeah. And what is the signal that's coming in from people that just take hikes? So I think those two things are combined, and it's actually very useful as a strategy because then you can also be thinking about a different type of sole of a shoe that's now very specific to be taking up and preserving DNA and all kinds of other things around that. So no, absolutely fantastic. And I think, so I would sort of comments that I would make is, and then write your name when you make comments on other posts itself, because then the person knows where that came from. They can actually talk about it, link it to eDNA sampling. And then tomorrow at the lab session, we can actually talk about what's under our shoes before we do the samples. Okay, I think the mosquitoes I can say quite a lot because there's a lot of work that we have done, Tapan. But I'll let you guys pick an, do you want to go next? I don't see that many things in the ocean, so I want ocean to be an important.
Writing a few of them, so I can just fill in the others, and I can.
Yeah, no, but just say a word about Posidonia. I know many people here don't know how much you love Posidonia.
Okay, I'm just gonna paste. I just write 3 on the same thread, so there's some other examples.
But just say a few words about Posidonia.
Okay.
It's impossible to once you get started talking about Posidonia, it's impossible to shut him down. So
okay,
it's very hard, but yeah.
Okay, so the context is I'm from Ibiza, and there we have the Posidonia oceanica, which is a plant that lives underwater, and it's like a bioindicator of the ecosystem. So it means if it's healthy, then the ecosystem is healthy, and the other side around. And well, the thing it's very slow to grow, and it's thousands of years old, and it's dying. So because of the boats killing it, and also the climate change. So yeah, my questions are about how, if we protect this species in particular, we can understand how we are protecting the whole ecosystem, even in a practical or economic sense for us. So my approach would be how it's possible to value what the importance of this plant is in a more economic sense, let's say. So how also how to imagine what would happen in the future if this plant extincts. So maybe by visually, let's say, imagine what will happen in the island of Ibiza if this plant was not here, because we are living from tourism, and this plant, what does is, in the first case, it just allows for all of the other species to be protected inside her. It's like a garden underwater. So the fishes put the eggs inside and they feed and they grow. So a lot of species are alive thanks to it. And also it produces oxygen, captures CO2, also protects the beaches because of like a wall for strong tides, also produces the sun because the organisms that lives on it. So actually the beaches are there thanks to it because it's hundreds of thousands of years old. Also the water is crystal clear because it keeps the dust in the ground. So you have beautiful beaches. So my thing is, even in a touristic point of view, like we have this paradise thanks to it. And then this would be.
Yeah, and I think one of the threads just on that front is, again, being, this was a point that was brought up a little bit before as well, because there's no economic value attached to it, then you're not willing to take the economic measures to protect it. And so when a value is attached, suddenly that also brings the price point to that market where no market existed. And it's very valuable as an approach. And I think the other thing that I'm very excited about is both on the biology of the organism itself, because you've been studying the seeds associated with it and whether they can actually be planted per se. There are some water tunnels that are accessible around on campus that have been previously used to study and understand what does the strength of the currents do when these sets of ecosystems start dying? When is the point where seagrass starts to disappear? And so there's a lot to be said, even in terms of what is actually exactly the process of the degradation itself. And I think the seed part of the story is also quite beautiful, because these seeds then remain for a certain amount of time. Many a times in these conservation efforts, we have very little idea of the life cycle of the system too. So lots of threads. And so kind of people should dive in and just say, oh, I'm interested in my approach is biological, and here are certain sets of scenarios. So people can, I think, think of these as little umbrellas that you want to park your tent in and spend time in terms of idea boards. I'm already seeing it's 10 a.m. or almost 10. Let's take one more. Who wants to go? Maybe someone who has not had the chance to talk at all in the class. And if somebody doesn't raise their hand who hasn't, I'll just pick on someone. I'm very good at that. Oh, go ahead. Prabha, yes.
Yeah, I couldn't type on the board due to some reason, I don't know. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, and then Prabha, can you do one line intro as well? Just.
Yeah, I'm from Bangalore, India, and currently I'm working with CCAMP Index on molecular diagnostics. Yeah.
Yes.
So my training is on cancer biology.
No, I remember who you are, but I want the students to also remember. That's why the intro. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Manu, I have a specific interest with antibiotic susceptibility test. Okay, and as we all know that misuse and overuse of antibiotic is like something very, very important to address. And especially at the clinic setting where the point of care device would really make a huge difference. So there are lots of things that are into the market and which are mostly suitable for high resource settings. So something we can think which we can reappropriate for low resource setting. And regarding the kind of approach, like the scientific principle, I thought of something very new. I had worked on exosomes, which are otherwise called extracellular vesicles. It's a huge, interesting area of research, right? And even bacteria do secrete a lot of membrane vesicles. And, the major two functions of these vesicles is to evade immune mechanism and then create resistance to antibiotics. So it's still a very hot research topic, but recent papers, of course, I'm not complete with my research. And for me, I mean, the number things which you had given us a first assignment. So I hope to finish it soon. And what I realized was Staph aureus, which is a very notorious resistant one, is secreting a lot of membrane vesicles. And you can use this principle to test antibiotic susceptibility as a point of care device. So this is something I had incubated, and as you know, like Bugworks is one of the incubators who is working on making all novel antibiotics, right? So I'm trying to converse with them, to really understand what would be the best approach. And this microvesicle secretion can be targeted basically in the form of, I don't know how paperfuge can be used, because these vesicles are isolated at a very high centrifugal force, like ultra centrifugation, right? So
no, I
that
absolutely love the idea. And I think one of the times, sometimes in thinking about a project is that going back to the notion that you had mentioned that it could be a crowded space, a lot of people are trying different things and they haven't scaled. So trying a new idea is actually very valuable. And I think what's beautiful about this is from a copy number perspective, a single bacteria would create a very large number of exosomes. And I think
we call it as membrane vesicles rather
and I think the thread that's I know for cancer, for example, a lot of people have been building sets of tools and technology. When we do the one-on-one sessions, let's dive in. I think the centrifugation isn't going to be an issue. I'm just thinking about whether the susceptibility and if the bacteria are directly using these things to communicate with each other, how much of a signal of the actual susceptibility is in the vesicle itself. So I think that would be a very valuable thread. In the ocean.
I'll just give one, sorry. I'll just give one example regarding the Staph aureus where they had used 2 different antibiotics and then checked the rate of or the release of microvesicles or the number of microvesicles released. So the more it is released means it is the bacteria is trying to resist itself from getting killed, right? So more the vesicles means more the resistance. So based on the quantitation, we can identify at least the susceptibility.
Yeah, no, I think that is fantastic because that's what I was struggling with. If it is correlated with the rate, one comment that I'll just make is, and Ellie and I have spent some time on boats, and we actually have an extensive frugal way of separating out viral particles. And I can imagine an approach like that to be applied. And then I think the other associated part of this is I can also imagine some ways of catching the rate of generation using microscopy-based techniques itself. So anyway, to be continued. So I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're already over time. But as you realize, this is sort of the most exciting phase of the class now. Try to really fill in details of your idea boards. And the notion is that now all the assignments will start combining. So the paper calculations that you've done, you should do it for the problem that you care about. The team that you're joining, join together and first do the scope of how big is that problem? What do we know about it? What are the numbers that you can bring to the table? And then the second assignment that you would do would be start building the Fred Park for the same problem. On Discord, you can start setting up times for different. So one way we do this on Discord, create a channel per idea board where people are there. You know, if an idea board doesn't have any folks that are championing it, then it will just remain there until someone champions it. But once things are championed, just create a descriptive name on Discord and people will come in and say, hi, I'm interested. I'm here to just learn. Or I am just so absolutely excited by this. I'll do anything to join in. And then what I'll do is I'll schedule one-on-one meetings with the groups and teams. So this is sort of a team building exercise. Sometimes you work on projects with folks you know, but sometimes you work on projects just because it's the common interest. And I would err towards working with folks with common interests because you can always work with people you know. Right. So I think in some sense, when you're balancing this, it's valuable to just be passionate about an idea. And then let's see, it's perfectly okay to have multiple people in the teams, but make sure that you're not just spread thin and you're spending time in lots of teams because then your team members will start relying on you and then you're not there. So it is valuable that if you commit to a team, you know, I would say commit to one team and hang out with yet another team just so that you're absorbing fly on the wall. But let that team know that I'm here to hang out because my hands are full with another class project itself. Okay. This is so much fun. This is the best part of the class. And again, for the folks that are still standing, you're kind of the real champions. And I think one of the threads would be is for the folks that are still standing, I'm assuming you're going to actually engage in projects. Yes? I hope so. Okay. All right. Bye, everyone. I'll take the silence as a yes.